Okay.
That's better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what's your name? What war did you serve in, and how long?
Well, my name is Stephen A. Limbaugh. I'm Lorraine Limbaugh's grandfather. I served in Korea. Now, the war had officially been negotiated to a truce. The war wasn't over, but there was a truce on it, a place called Panmunjom, where North Korean and Chinese representatives met with the United States and several other countries that had gone to Korea. More called a police action, but it was in fact a war. Anyway, when I got over there in 1959, I was there late 58, 59, and the first part of 60, 13 months. Was stationed in the military police railway security company. I had a crew that ran railway security from right out of the edge of Seoul, which was the capital of South Korea, all the way down to Busan, which was a port city on the other end of Korea. If you looked at a map of Florida, it looked like Jacksonville and Miami, very similar in distance and stuff like that. It was a war-torn country, terrible shape, very few vehicles of any kind except military jeeps and tanks. They used human manure fertilizer, because that's all they had. So we weren't allowed to eat anything off the market, as they called it. We had to eat out of the GI mess, we call it mess, tents, or they gave us what we call C rations, which were 1940, World War II, 1942 rations that came in a box like that. There'd be 3 or 4 cans of various foods in each box, and a small candy bar, some napkins.
So it was like kind of like an MRE.
Yeah, but MREs are much more advanced.
So it was just more
way.
like canned.
Yeah, it was mostly canned stuff, and you open the can with a little can opener they gave you in there, and you bent the lid back, and then you tore the box that it came in, which was specially treated to get very hot, and you'd light it with a match and hold it here, and then hold the can over it like that, and from the bottom that fire would go up and it would heat whatever was in the can in about a couple of 2 or 3 minutes. And then you had a plastic spoon and you just ate it.
Okay, so Dad said that you he said, what was it? You went into like bars or places, and you were kind of like a police officer. You kept people in shape. So what position exactly?
Well, we were in the military police, which is the police force for the Army, and so we did have duties besides the railway security that we would have to take a certain area on the edge of Seoul. Now, Seoul was the capital city, but it's hard to realize if you look at it today with hundreds of 20-story buildings, building cars and tanks, tractors. Very progressive country in the last 30 years or so, or 40. Mm-hmm. But in those days, it was pretty run down. There were bombshell holes from where it had been shot up pretty bad when it was conquered by the North Koreans and the Chinese. Anyway, we would go down and make sure that the GIs, the only clothes we were allowed to wear was government issued clothes. That's, by the way, GI comes from government issued. That's where that comes from. If you hear them talking about GIs, we could only wear Army uniforms. We had no civilian clothes, so they knew we were in the Army. And we would police the local bars, make sure nobody was getting in trouble, getting too drunk, or fighting, or causing any kind of problems. We would have to take them out and deliver them back to their company. So that, basically the same functions that a police force serves in the United States, in addition to being ready at all times for combat.
So why did you serve? Because I know that some people are...
Well, when I came along, and that's been a while ago, there was a draft. A draft meant that when you reached a certain age, and I think it was 18, pretty sure it was, you had to register with the draft board. And every city had a draft board made up of about a group of civilians, 8 or 10, 12, I don't know. And they would draw a number. They put all these numbers in a basket, and they draw a number out. And if your number was drawn, then you went into the draft. And what they did with the draft is that's how they got people in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and the Coast Guard, I guess. So if they drafted you, typically it was 2 years in the Army, unless you went and joined some other service just before they drafted you or after they drafted you. And so they drafted, I hit the draft number, and I had a draft notice, and and so I went down and talked to the Army recruiter about it, and he said if I went in and drafted for 2 years, they could put me anywhere, driving truck, cooking, whatever. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. So I went for 3 years so that I could pick the military police and get that particular type of training.
Did you ever have to physically fight somebody? Like if they were misbehaving, kind of put them in a chokehold and get them out?
Well, yeah, we had it occasionally once in a while. Most of them would give you too much static because they knew they'd get in a lot of trouble when they got back to their commanding officer back in their company. If they fought or hit an MP, they usually get a lot more punishment. Otherwise, more than likely, just would chew them out and let them go. But yeah, we had to haul a few folks out like that.
So, you explained that you went for 3 years so you could be that kind of police officer, but did you ever have to actually go into training for that?
Oh yeah.
Or did you
Yes, yeah. There was a Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Augusta, Georgia is the military police training center, and I went there as a recruit and went through the 9 or 10 or 11 weeks of training, which included lectures in military law, police enforcement, evidence, search and seizure, and the use of the Army 45 and the Army grease gun and the Army shotgun. Not that we planned to shoot anybody but enemy, but you had to be trained in it. And I did well enough in the basic class that the 9 weeks that they kept me over as cadre, they called it. That was, I assisted the other instructors and became an instructor of sorts in the military police school. So we got a new group of recruits every 11 weeks. And then for that 11 weeks, we marched them to class and went and got them and took them to eat. Did the parade field on Friday. Took them out, taught them to shoot the 45 and the grease gun and the shotgun. They had days on the range. Taught them some judo so they could protect themselves or take somebody into custody without having to hurt them too bad. Back then we carried a military police club, about that long wooden club, which is very effective to control people without having to hurt them too bad. But if you really got in a bad situation, you could use it as a club, but most of us never did. And how to handcuff people and how to search them and stuff like that.
This one's kind of dark, but it's a question.
Okay.
Did you ever see any dead Koreans? Before they could get picked up?
A couple of times from motor vehicle accidents. Now the fighting was still under the truce, and so we weren't actually fighting each other. And I was down from what they call the 38th parallel, which is where the truce line was drawn. But we were on this side with our troops, and they were on that side with their troops, and there was always the chance that something would happen. They'd come over, or I don't think we would have gone over unless something really had happened. But fortunately, they never. But we had a lot of alerts where. My job I was just below Seoul, about 10 miles. So my job was to take my squad on the alert, if we had an alert like they were coming over or might be coming over. And we would take 2 deuce and a halves, that's 2.5-ton trucks, and a couple of Jeeps. We were armed with pistols and submachine guns, grease guns. And I'd take my squad and go downtown to Seoul just as quickly as I could. We had sirens on the Jeeps. And pick up, it wasn't the real president, vice president of South Korea, what was his name? I've forgotten his name now. We would pick up his staff, put them in our trucks, and then we would drive them halfway down the peninsula of Korea to the middle town, was called Daegu. And there that they would be picked up by MPs from Busan, which was the other half of the Korea, and they would be taken to Busan. That was in case the Chinese or the North Koreans were coming over to fight. Well, they would be in Seoul in about an hour or two, because we could only slow them down. We couldn't stop them. We'd have enough troops there. But we were getting the VIPs, the officers of Korea, the elected president and all, out of the danger area for as far as we could, because the other end of Korea was about 200 miles away, and that would have given us time to form up our troops and begin to hold them back and stop them and inflict casualties on them. But we wouldn't be able to do that for the first 40 or 50 miles, first day, 2 days, before we could get enough troops in there to begin to slow them down. Anyway, what we did was take them down there for protection, and they could have taken a plane or a boat out of Busan if the enemy had gotten any closer. Now, just as information, in the Korean War, when it really happened, they come over into South Korea and attacked North Korea, unbeknownst. They just attacked, and of course, we had very few troops there then. We had to move troops in from Japan and bring them from the United States, so it took us a few weeks to get enough troops there to make any. Well, they pushed us all the way, almost to Busan, and they surrounded Busan in a semicircle. We had the ocean at our back, not me, but the ones that were there ahead of me. But then we had gotten enough troops out of Japan shipped in and other people to where we could begin to put up a strong defense. Well, then we began to push them back. General MacArthur was in charge of it, a hell of a general, excuse my English. Well, he began to push them back like this, but it was still almost touch and go between the North Koreans and us. So what he did is he took a whole bunch of our soldiers and went around behind them at Incheon, the port of Incheon, and we went in at Incheon with our troops and then come in behind them and busted them up pretty bad. Then we drove them all the way back to the Chinese border, way up here, all the way through North Korea, and drove them to the border. But what happened then? The Chinese got in the war.
Right.
So, and all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers come roaring over the Yalu, Yalu River, and began to attack us. Well, again, we weren't prepared to handle that, the military, and they drove us back again, almost to the port of Busan before we got enough men and equipment and plotted our strategy to begin to push them back. And so anyway, it was a back and forth war with a lot of deaths. And finally, we were about center to center in the middle of Korea, 38th parallel. Is what they call it. Parallel to the lines. You don't see them, but they're drawn on a map. The parallels go this way, horizontals go this way. The 38th parallel was where we sort of clicked up, right, kind of in the middle. If you looked at Florida, and you all are familiar with Florida, take Orlando was probably about like where the 38th parallel was in Korea, sort of in the center. And that's where the line is called Panmunjom. Don't know what that means. But anyway, that's where we have on this side the North Koreans and the Chinese, and on this side Americans and some British and French and Turkish soldiers, and of course South Korean. And there's about a space there of, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile or something like that. It's called no man's land. So from the Chinese North Korean side, after you leave the barracks, they had soldiers on guard all the time, and we did down here. And there was about a 500 or 600 or 800 yard space there called no man's land, that if anybody from their side crossed into that, we could shoot. If any from our, they could shoot. And that was the no man's land, and that was the third. And it is still today in negotiations, and that's been 40 years. Hadn't been any fighting or war since then. But they're still in negotiations. They did sign a truce, both sides, that stopped the actual fighting, but they still, technically the war is still, or the attack is still going on. But some of that's politics as well as soldiering.
So I know that for at least the Vietnam War, when soldiers would come back, they faced a lot of prejudice, and some of them
we
they
didn't
were
have
kicked
that.
out.
Our Korean soldiers and us, when we come home, they
didn't have any of that.
We didn't have much of that. There was a little bit, but you'd see a few dissidents at the airport, maybe where you come in and landed, and we all came back home through California, either on the boat or on the plane. I was lucky enough to fly, and there was a few protesters around, but nothing like happened in Vietnam. I mean, it was bad. They call the soldiers baby killers and all that, and the soldiers were doing what they were ordered to do, and they were ordered to that by the generals, and the generals were doing what they were told to do by the president and his staff, and the commands and the major commanders. The major commander of the services called Chief of Staff, Army, military Chief of Staff, and he's appointed as he's a top general from one of the services, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and they serve terms as Chief of Staff, and then his staff is the senior general in each of those armed services serves on that staff, and that they are the military staff, Army, Navy, Marines, and all. and they're under the direct control of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of their various. You have a Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Marines. Well, the Marines actually are under the Navy, but they're civilians, but they are the head person for that service, all reporting to the Defense Secretary of Defense, and he reports to the President.
So you're gone for 13 months. That's what?
13
That's
long
a year
months.
and a month.
That's a year and a month. That was the tour of duty.
So how did you deal with homesickness?
Well, I guess I was 19 when I went, maybe 20, but 19 or 20 when. See, I stayed at the military police school. I went there, and then I stayed there as an instructor at cadre for about another almost year, and then I come up on levy for Korea. Well, it's an unusual situation. Y'all might not find this unusual, but I did. Her uncle, my oldest son, my wife had gotten pregnant, and she was about, I don't know, a month or two pregnant. So I got on levy, which meant I was going to get shipped out to Korea. So I went and talked to the assignment officer about it. I said, my wife's pregnant. Is there any way I could miss the assignment and stay here and see my son born? He said, I can do that, but the day he's born, I will send you to Korea for 13 months, and you'll come home, you'll be 13 months. So if you go ahead now, he'll be born while you're gone, but you'll get home before he's 8 or 9 months old. And that's what happened. He was 9 months old when I come home from Korea, first time I'd seen him. And of course, it's hard to realize today in modern communications, they had phone service, but it was all strictly government. You couldn't make a phone call home. We had to use Western Union telegraphs, which you probably in your class don't even know what a telegraph is.
We do. It's history class. We
okay.
learned about telegraphs.
Well, good. Well, that's the only way you could. And I couldn't send an official army. I got a telegram, and Alex, her uncle, her dad's brother, was 3 days old when I got the telegram finally. I'd been out. It come to the company finally after 2 days, but I was on a military train run, and I didn't get back for 2 days. When I come in, they said, we got a telegram for you. Well, of course, that scared me, not knowing what it would be. Knew it had to be some kind of big news. Anyway, it said, your son Alex S. Limbaugh was born, Anyway, when I got home, he was 9 months old. So another story, but one that you think about, that it would have been nice to have been here. But I was here for her daddy's birth and her aunt's birth.
You made 2 out of 3.
Made 2 out of 3. Best I could do.
So, I've heard stories of soldiers coming back and their family was never the same after they left. Like, their children were grown up. Were things, of course they were different because now you had a kid, but
yeah.
Was your relationship with Nana any different? Was it harder? Was it easier?
Yeah, that's a question to think about. No, it wasn't harder. I mean, I was glad to be home. We were young and still in love, and now I had a baby. So she was happy to have me home. And I was sure happy to be home. Of course, we still were in the Army, so I come home, and I was home for, I think I had a 30-day leave, and then we had to pack up and go up to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and Columbia, South Carolina. I still had a year to go on my 3-year enlistment, and I became a military police patrol supervisor in Columbia, South Carolina for the first few months I was there. And then they put me on the AWOL apprehension team. AWOL, absent without official leave, AWOL. Mm-hmm. If a soldier left the base without permission or either went off on a weekend pass but didn't come back, they were considered AWOL. And what would happen is after they were gone 14 days, they would send this notice out to the various forts where he had kinfolks, mother, father, sister, brother, uncle, aunt, even first cousins sometimes. And every military post near those people would send their AWOL apprehension team. Most of the time, we drove an Army car, but we had civilian clothes. We were armed with little .38 caliber pistols, just because I only had to use it once. I didn't shoot it, but I had to pull it. Anyway, we would go into their hometown or wherever it was, and I'd have a thing there say, we're looking for Joe Smith. Joe Smith is from this town. Here's his address. Well, the first thing we'd do is go to the chief of police or the sheriff, or both, and say, look, this kid's AWOL. We're looking for him. And then most of the time in these towns we went in, they knew him. Now, the big towns know, but little towns, yeah, I know Joe Smith. He's a kid raised right here in town. Played baseball with my son in junior high. I know him. I said, well, he's AWOL, and if you'll pick him up and call us, and we give him a thing to where they could call us, we will come and get him and take him back to the Army, and he won't be in too much trouble if he doesn't stay too long. And so a lot of them, we would go talk to the family and be talking to them, and we'd say, well, now look, we need to find Joe. He's AWOL right now from the Army, and that can be a lot of trouble if he doesn't come back within a reasonable time. And I'd say, have you seen your son? Is he here? A lot of times they'd say, no, he's not here. He's not even pointed at a closet or under a bed. So they knew he shouldn't be AWOL. And then we just get him out of the closet or out from under the bed or wherever, and put him in the car and handcuff him and take him back to Fort Jackson. And then he'd go back to his original company, and the company commander then could issue disciplinary action. He could make him do KP for 15 days or do cleanup around the company area, or if it was the second or third time, he might send him to the post stockade for 15 days. So there was some penalties. Could fine him $50 or something like that out of his pay, which if you took $50 away from an Army guy, you took a lot at that point in time. But no, overall, we got all of them back safely, and the Army picked up the discipline on it, and most of them just got by with some what we call company punishment, nothing too serious. But getting back with Nana, it was great to be home, and like I said, but we had to go right back in the Army, but we did had a little walk-up apartment there. Wasn't much, but it was ours to live in, and she kept the baby, and I kept the Army, and we made our year and a half or whatever I had left, and then we come home and go back to our civilian jobs. But
do you ever miss serving?
The Army?
Yeah.
Well, I did 2 years in the reserves when I got home. I had a year that I had to serve to complete what I had, and then President Kennedy extended us because of the trouble in Lebanon. He extended all reservists another year, so I served 2 years in the reserves. That was just a weekend thing, once a month, so it wasn't too bad. In summer camp for 2 weeks, yeah, you kind of miss it. It's a, I'd say, fraternal organization then, but now that it's mixed, it's, I guess, fraternal plus sorority type work. You get to know the people. You're living with them, you're sleeping with them, you're eating with them, so you get to be
They're
close
kind of like
to
a family.
Yeah, kind of like a family, a far-off family maybe, but you get to know some of them, and like people do, you tend to make friends with some people and you know other people. You can't be friends with a company's typically 200 at that time guys, and you get to know the sergeant in charge and of course the lieutenant or the captain, and you get to know them, but you get to be friends with some of them. It's just a natural thing you do, especially if you're like in Korea, where you can't just go out anytime on your own. You usually wanted you to go out and at least a couple of people together. And so, you make friends with some of them, and you miss them kind of, like you would just if you work somewhere and you work with people for a couple of years and then you leave that job, you kind of miss the people a little while, but like over time you tend to, make new friends and people drift out of your memory as much. But I made a couple of good friends in Korea.
So if you had a choice, like, to join without the draft, would you? Like, would you just do it again just out of choice, or was the draft the only reason that you did it? Well,
the draft was probably the reason back then that I did it. Having served 3 years active, 2 in the reserves, and getting to know more about it. I don't know, if the same circumstances in today and didn't have a draft, I probably wouldn't have gone because I had just gotten married. If it was a war and the country needed me, yes, I'd go in and I'd go down tomorrow. Of course, they wouldn't take me today. I'm older than their tanks and jeeps. What can I take? But yeah, if it was a real war, if somebody attacked us like Russia or China and attacked like the Japanese did Pearl Harbor, if I was younger at the right age, I would go back and serve to defend my country. But as far as would I do it voluntarily, probably not. in today's world. And you know, I mean, if it was something like the Korean thing, or if they didn't have the draft, you know, then I might not go. And which we haven't had the draft now for quite a few years. It's an all-volunteer army and has been now for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, no draft. But they're managed to get enough people to serve, and they have some good benefits with them. I got my college education based on the GI Bill, which sent me to school for, I didn't go full, I was still working full-time, so it took me about 8 or 10 years to get my degree at night and weekends. But they paid for the bulk of it. I don't think my GI Bill ran out till the last semester of my. Of course, the company I worked for, AT&T, moved me around, moved me to Atlanta, and I had to finish my business degree in Atlanta at Mercer Business School, which was okay. But I changed schools about 3 times because of moving with work. But it's all part of your life, I guess, and life's history. But it was. Being overseas in a war area that had been in war and seeing what it was really like can change your life. It does mature you some. Is that it?
Yeah.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.